artists! Have you seen the artwork of Jen Stark? Recently, I've just discovered this artist thanks to another art teacher, Miss Jessica Moore. I want to share with you some of her artwork and use it as an inspiration for our next artwork. So take a look at some of her artwork right now. This is Jen Stark. She's a contemporary artist who lives in Los Angeles, California. She is making art today, and she's best known for her drip paintings, where she uses lines and different color schemes to create a sense of movement in her pictures. She also creates sculptures, very dynamic, using cut paper. She also has made murals, which are pictures on the sides of buildings. Today we're going to be focusing on her drip art, so gather your supplies. So as you saw in Jen Stark's artwork, she is really famous for those drippy pieces of artwork. And so we're going to kind of create our own drippy art today by drawing. And I'm going to start with a pencil, and it's a good idea to actually practice this. You might want to use both sides of your paper. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to practice drawing some drippy lines. And we're going to change those lines into shapes that we can later use for coloring and making our designs, and use some different color schemes. So first today, we're going to just make the lines. And so I'm going to start with a pencil. And to make drippy lines, what you want to do, you will want to draw lightly. I'm going to draw a little darker just so you can see. But drawing drippy lines means that you're going to be drawing curvy lines. Now, when you make your curvy lines, you want to use kind of very vertical lines and have different sizes. And it's okay if it wobbles a little bit. Here's one shape of a drippy line. I'm going to try to create at least 4 or 5 of these sort of shapes. None of them should be the same, because as you probably have seen drips of paint or drips of other things, they are not all going to be the same. So you start on the side of another one, and you just kind of practice. Sometimes you use shorter lines. It's kind of nice to have a variety, but we're always going to be using curvy. And wherever you start your next one, and I think I have room for at least one more. Now, if you decide you would like to practice some more, the thing you have to do when you're making drippy lines is just be careful not to just make them all the same, and to have some very vertical kind of movements when you're making those lines. Just let them flow, and you might want to practice it even with your finger first. So once you've kind of practiced, if you really like this, go ahead and use this. If you need to, you can draw some more on the other side of your paper. Maybe you want some that are thicker and some that are thinner drips. And then once you have your designs, your drip lines, you can go ahead and use a marker to trace this. Now, there's 2 kinds of markers that you can use. A Crayola marker is great because you can make a variety of thickness with lines, so you would only need to use this. If you're using a Crayola marker, you will later use either crayon or colored pencil to add color to this. You may also, if you have this available to you, use a Sharpie. The nice thing about a Sharpie is that it's permanent. You also have to be a little bit careful about that. Sometimes you can't get quite as many different thicknesses with just using it like you can with the Crayola. But also, the nice thing about Sharpie is that, yes, you can use crayons or colored pencil to color with, but you could also use marker to color with. You can't use marker if you're using the Crayola marker to add color, because the Crayola marker will smear once you start adding the other colors. The permanent marker will not. So I will show you both ways. When you're using, when you're getting ready to trace, if you're using the Crayola marker, I want you to try to make a really thick line. And so I'm going to lean this over, and you might want to practice this on a scrap piece of paper first. And you can make a variety. You can have like thin lines. If you lean it over, you can get medium-sized lines. If you lean it over and you're using the flat part, you can get a really nice thick line. And that's my goal, is to try to get a nice thick line. If you can't lean it over far enough to get a really thick line with your Crayola marker, you could just simply go over and trace it a few times to get that thick line. So I'm going to try to lean my marker over as much as I can, and I'm going to make a nice thick line. Remember, if you're using a Crayola marker or any water-based marker, that you have to give it a little time to dry. If your hands are sweaty and you touch this, or if it hasn't dried, it can smear. So I'm going to try to keep my hands off of that right now and make some thick lines. Now, if you don't have a marker at home, you could do the same thing with crayon or colored pencil. I'm going to trace all of these lines. And if at any point my line doesn't look thick enough, I always can go back and trace it again so that I end up with some really nice thick lines. The goal is to have a variety of thicknesses in your line today. So if you feel like your lines don't feel thick enough, go ahead and go trace those again. Make sure you have kind of a nice smooth movement as you're moving your marker on the paper. Remember, it is okay to turn your paper too if you're feeling like you're going to touch something and you might smear it. Now, if you were doing the Sharpie way, you would need to probably trace this a couple times. And I'm just going to do this without drawing my lines first, and let's hope I am happy with my lines. Looks like I have some nice shapes for my drips. Now, the thing is, you'll notice if I compare these two, these lines were much thicker and these were still pretty thin. So if you're using the Sharpie, you're going to need to go back and trace these 2, maybe even 3 lines. Now, if you're lucky and you have a thicker Sharpie at home, you could use that as well, but I do not, so I am just going to use my Sharpie and trace it twice. I'll show you what that looks like, maybe even 3 times. I'll show this to you once I get it all traced. All right, so you can see now that I've traced this over 2, in some places I even traced it 3 times just to make sure my lines were nice and thick. If you see any pencil lines at this point still sticking out, you can go back and erase those. Just make sure that if you're using a Crayola marker or a water-based marker, that it is completely dry before you go and erase. Now at this point, what I recommend you do is you're going to be using your marker again, and we are going to draw some more lines. If you want to try to sketch out a few of these lines first with pencil, you can, but here's the goal. What we're going to do is we're going to make these lines thinner, and we're going to follow the drip that you originally created. So when I draw this next line, I am going to be looking at this line and trying to make the same type of line, just with a thinner line. So I'm going to use the tip of my marker, and I'm going to get kind of a nice thin line, and I'm going to leave an equal amount of space between my drips. And I'm just going to smoothly, to keep your line smooth, just kind of move your marker at the same speed throughout. Now, like I said, if you want to do that with pencil first a few times and practice. Another thing sometimes I've done is just practice with my finger so that I get kind of the feel where that line is going to move. And I'm going to continue to fill this whole shape with drippy lines, and always looking at the line that is right below as I make my drips. And you'll notice that this third line has changed from the original one because the space is getting smaller and my drips are changing just a little bit. I do not want to run into the other drips. I want to just kind of leave an equal space as best as I can as I fill up this shape. When I get this shape done, I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so I have one of my shapes filled with drips, and I'm going to continue to do that with all of mine, remembering to follow and leave an equal space between the drips. Also trying to make the lines thin and not thick, and you can really see the difference between the thin and the thick lines, the more thin ones that you do. All right, so I've been working on my drippy lines, and you may have when you get down in the second row of shapes here of lines, you may notice that when you get to these places, you're going to have to lift your marker up as you get closer to the other drips. You don't want to draw through them, so you just have to pick up your marker when you're making those drips sometimes. By doing all of these lines and drawing them to match your other drips, you're learning how to control your marker and your pen. You could be using a pen, and it's making you have better drawing skills in the future, learning to control your drawing supplies. All right, one more drip to go, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so I have finished all the drips using my Crayola marker, and I will do the same thing with my Sharpie as well. And when I have them done today, this is a good place to stop. Don't try to color anything in today. Show me your work by taking a picture of it on Seesaw. If you're at school, remember to also write your name on the back along with your code, and then save this paper for next week. All right, I can't wait to see how you do. And until next time, stay creative. Bye.